that implies, well, we don't really know who's the daddy and blah, blah.
And welcome to Grow Your Grass Off. Today, with special guest Joseph Lofthouse. He is the author of Landrace Gardening. Enjoy.
All right, we are super excited today to have Joseph Lofthouse on our show. He lives in Utah and he is author of some books and famous for his landrace farming and gardening. Joseph, could you tell us a little about what you do and where you are and how you came to get into all of this?
Sure. So I I grow up in, or I farm in the mountains of northern Utah, where my family has been living for 150 years or so. And I was a market gardener for a number of years, and I couldn't grow a lot of the warm weather crops that like tomatoes and peppers and melons, squash, because we just didn't have enough heat up here to grow those crops. And so I started developing my own varieties rather than trusting in the seed companies to give me varieties that wouldn't work when I planted them here anyway. And what I found out through that process is that the crops that grew best for me were those that were genetically diverse and cross-pollinating, because then they could adapt themselves to my garden rather than me trying to change my soil pH and my temperature, and so eventually we started calling that idea of promiscuous pollination and survival of the fittest landrace gardening, which is the traditional way that people have been gardening for as long as we can remember, except for like the last 60 years or so when people decided that we're going to inbreed everything. And so what happens with the inbreds is they forget how to deal with particular bugs and soils and weather, and so they're just really weak crops. And so people think they have to protect them with trellises and sprays and fertilizers, and I've got rid of all of those things in my garden. The only input that I add to my garden is water, because I live in the deep desert, and I could grow some crops without water, and I do, but as much as possible, I try to avoid I just avoid all those inputs.
Wow. How many acres do you have right now that you're
So
farming?
I'm currently growing on 3/4 of an acre. In the past, I've had up to 4 acres, and that was too much for me. 3 was about right when I was young and strong, but as I get older, I'm less ambitious.
So I think that a lot of people that we encounter in this world that are, really into organic, regenerative, heirloom, all of these words that describe what we do, almost nobody is familiar with landrace when I bring it up.
Right.
Could you explain a little bit how that's different than, let's say, regenerative or heirloom, crops?
So I'll start with an heirloom, because an heirloom is a variety that was bred for a farm far away and long ago. And then since that time, it's undergone 50 years worth of inbreeding. And so every time that a crop is crossed with itself or its close relative, it loses genetic diversity. It loses its genetic memory about how to deal with stress. And so the heirlooms are handicapped just because of the inbreeding that's happened. Like domestic tomatoes, for example, have lost 95% of the genetic diversity that they originally had. And so, that's diversity about how to deal with late blight and septoria, you know, white flies, whatever it is, all of those things, all of those genetics got lost by the inbreeding. And I don't know if I really know a definition for regenerative gardening, because that's not part of it's
Yeah.
not part of what I think about, other than I grow in the same field that I've grown in for like 14 years now, with no fertilizer, no compost, and maybe that's regenerative, maybe it's not, I don't know.
I have a question, a little bit off topic, just because I'm a farmer myself. Do you till?
I do till about twice a year, once just to prepare a seed bed, and then I might till in the fall to prepare the seed bed for the early spring crops that are coming in. I also grow a lot of weeds, and the weeds get chopped and dropped right back into the soil where they grew.
And do you so you don't add any compost or nutrients
No,
at all? It's just basically the weeds, and then the genetics are strong enough to just grow.
exactly.
Wow, that's
Because
amazing.
what happened in commercial agriculture is the people that are growing the seeds have been growing with fertilizer for like decades. And so the plants say, oh, we require fertilizer in order to grow. But in the real world, outside of a farm, they don't require fertilizer to grow. And so I'm just trying to get back to the original way that plants have been growing for as long as plants have existed.
Do you have any greenhouse structure that you grow in, or is it just strictly outside?
I do have a greenhouse. I use it to make tomato starts and pepper starts. And I use it during the winter to grow some greens when
Mhm.
the rest of the ecosystem is snow covered for 5 months out of the year.
Yeah, cool. How big is it?
Um, 20 feet by 8 feet.
Nice.
So you use the term a lot, promiscuous pollination. I love that.
Yes.
So I basically, I think, I understand what that means is, you're letting things cross, and hybridize like crazy. And
Exactly.
a lot of people that are just getting into it, and even people that have been doing farming, organic farming or whatever for a while, they think hybrids are bad. I have a lot of clients that, is this a hybrid? I don't plan. I've read somewhere that hybrids are bad. They don't have any context about what a hybrid really is. But in your work, you want hybrids. Is that correct?
Yes, I do. In my ideal world, every plant would be a hybrid in every generation. I wouldn't know who the daddy was, but some crops are like 30% cross-pollinating, and so those are nice to work with because they're kind of stable, but they're also rearranging their genetics so that they can figure out new ways to deal with stress, whatever those stresses might be.
Because it seems like we're getting out of nature's way in a sense, right? Would you say that's kind of an ethos that your program sort of carries on? It's just
Right. Well, I figure that the ecosystem does 80% of the selection in my garden. And I do a little bit of selection for flavor, and if something really is eye appealing to me. But for the most part, I stay out of the way. And the reason I choose to use the word promiscuous pollination is because in the seed industry, there's this term called open pollination. And that implies, well, we don't really know who's the daddy and blah, blah, and there might be some crossing going on. No, what that actually means is we have done everything we possibly can do to prevent that crop from crossing and to make sure that it's inbreeding so that it's stable and consistent. And
like
and
corn or something like that.
uh-huh. And
Right.
so to me, that's I choose the word promiscuous to say I am encouraging, I'm seeking out that cross pollination. Yeah.
If you don't mind sharing your story that I read about in your book of when you started growing the melons, and how your first year you got hardly any, and then by the third year after saving the seeds. I just love that story. If you could.
Right. So I can't grow melons in my valley because any variety that I grow just doesn't have enough. There's not enough heat in my ecosystem for the melons to grow. So once I decided that I was going to grow all of my varieties landrace style, I ordered about 20-30 packets of seeds from the seed companies, and I went to the grocery store and got melons, and I went to the farmer's market and got melons. And so I planted those all in a patch in my garden. And the first year, most of the seeds didn't germinate. They grew plants that were like 6 inches long in the whole growing season. There were a couple plants that did okay, and some of them produced some green fruits that first year, and the seeds in them were viable enough that I could plant them the second year. The second year, there were a couple of fruits in the patch that produced more fruit than all of the rest of the patch combined. And so taking those seeds and replanting those, then the third year I was getting hundreds of melons every time I harvested, and from a smaller patch than originally. And I think of that third year as the magical year, because the first year, everything that isn't locally, or that just can't deal with the local ecosystem, dies. The second year, the survivors cross with the survivors, and by the third year, things can really thrive. And the other part of the cantaloupe story is I taste every fruit before I save seeds from it. And so what happened after a few years is I was getting cantaloupes that were just smelly and aromatic and sweet, and the juices would just melt in your mouth. And so I had to change the name of those fruits to start calling them muskmelons, because they're not anywhere near the same thing as what a grocery store would sell to me. And so I had to change the name.
Wow, I love it. I have so there are certain crops, certain plants that this works a lot quicker on, and I think
Right.
you call them outcrossing.
Yeah.
And
So crops that the landrace gardening works really well with are the outcrossing plants. Things like corn, squash, the melons, any of the brassicas, they're carrots, they're all really outcrossing, and so landrace gardening works really well with them. It's harder to do with things like tomatoes or beans because they have cross-pollination rates that are like 1%, 5%. And so if you pay attention, you can still find the natural hybrids, and they will do better for you than the inbreds, but it's easier. You get the most bang for your buck if you work with the more promiscuous species.
and you've tried this with lots and lots of different plants, even perennials. Is that right?
Yeah, well, like I'm currently on my 4th generation of a walnut breeding project my family's been involved in. And during those 4 generations, we've been able to move the walnuts 600 feet higher in elevation, because previously they were right on the edge of their hardiness zone. And so we've moved them up an extra hardiness zone.
Wow. So have you had a lot of experience in selecting these varieties for disease pressure? Because when I moved to Tennessee last year, I've had way more plant diseases than I have ever encountered in California. And I know that a lot of the varieties that I chose to order from seed catalogs this year were supposed to be resistant to a lot of diseases and whatnot. Is that something you've encountered?
So, I welcome diseases and pests into my garden because they teach my plants how to be strong. Because anything that survives it this year is going to be better capable of surviving it next year. And so I really don't have diseases or pests in my garden. I mean, I know they exist, I know they're here, but they don't bother my plants. A few years ago, I told a lady that she could plant some squash in my garden. And so she planted them. They were like a zucchini. And the squash bugs come, and they were like thousands of squash bugs on her plants, and they all withered and died from diseases. And I'm like, I shouldn't be gleeful about someone else's misfortune, but it really showed to me that those pests are in my garden, but my plants don't care about them.
Wow. That's amazing.
How much time do you spend out there, per day, in season time, would you say?
Oh, I'm not really a very good farmer. I kind of ignore my fields and they just grow.
Okay. Do you have any kind of drip irrigation? I know you say you don't
So,
water much, but
so
what?
I use our community standard irrigation, which is 4-inch irrigation pipe with rainbird sprinklers on them. And I water once a week or twice a week. The university studied my fields and said with my soil type, it was better if I water twice a week for a third of the time. And so that's what I've been doing.
Cool.
And do you sell at local farmers markets?
Well, so what I discovered is if I take a little cantaloupe, and I sell it for $3 at the farmer's market, that has $30 worth of seeds in it. And so you'd start doing that math, and it's really easy to be a seed farmer instead of a market a vegetable farmer.
Absolutely. And so people locally are buying those?
So most of the seed that I grow, I send to the Experimental Farm Network, and they distribute it for me. And
Okay.
so I don't have to touch it after I get it cleaned.
Excellent. And you've been doing this a long time. So have you noticed that there's a increased demand for these things? Is there growing interest, or how do you feel about that?
Well, yes, there is, because the first time that I made a post, or when I first started searching for landrace growing practices, about all I got was some academic articles, or I got something about marijuana.
Yeah, that's all that
And
usually comes up when I search too.
and these days there's whole communities that are converting themselves to growing landrace style, and so that's really good to see. When of course I wrote a book, and so the book has attracted a lot of attention. It's kind of distracting from my farming now, because I'm in that odd place where I'm sort of an author and I'm sort of a farmer, trying to find balance between those two.
Absolutely. So the Experimental Farm Network, you work with them quite a bit, or you just send your seeds and?
Yeah, we've been, oh, yeah, we've been working together like 5 years. And
okay. Because I just get so excited about it. I'm like, every little region, every microclimate needs their own landrace, seeds.
yes, I agree with that. another thing that has really surprised me about landrace seeds is there's so much genetic diversity in them that if I send it to some foreign climate, the something in the population can thrive wherever they're planted. And so if someone saves the seeds from the survivors, you know, then they've got a nice good start on a local variety.
Wow, that's fascinating. It makes sense to me actually that, and I didn't think of that before. So even though your climate is, let's say, radically different than mine here in Tennessee, or you know, actually anybody here, where all our
Yeah.
climates are pretty different,
Mhm.
that it'd be good to start with your seeds because they have more depth in their genetics.
Right. And
Yeah.
I think part of what I have been selecting for is stress resistance. And whatever the nature of the stress is can vary from ecosystem to ecosystem, but the fundamental stress resistant mechanism is very strong.
Excellent.
I'm curious, Joseph, if you feel like this came from your background and how you grew up, or is it something you maybe stumbled on, you know, as you kind of got more experience in farming? What do you think? Is it, because to me, I think there's that indigenous way of looking at it, you know, compared to maybe what we do in conventional systems, you know?
So I grew up where nature is controlled and dominated, and you grow an inbred variety and you put poison on it, and you know, just all of those uh mega farm kind of ways to deal with the garden. And so at the same time that I was becoming more landrace oriented, I was becoming less control and domination oriented. And so for me, it's been an entire lifestyle change to let the plants do what they want to do. One of the hardest things for me is to stop weeding my garden, you know, because my childhood brainwashing is just, you know, it just bangs at me so much to have a dirty, weedy garden right on the main highway through town. And I'm like, yeah, you know, but eventually I would like to move to where I'm foraging an ecosystem instead of gardening. You know, like I'm living in a food forest, and so I'm paying a lot more attention these days to selecting for things that thrive with the weeds. And I don't have to, you know, I can treat my garden more like an ecosystem and less like a controlled, dominated, yeah, thing.
Have you ever run across Masanobu Fukuoka's work, One Straw Revolution?
Oh, yes. I am glad that I read his books after I wrote mine,
Okay.
because he really would have influenced the way that I wrote. I got his book right here on my desk somewhere, two of them.
Yeah, I can see that sort of similarity in that process.
We just did a seed swap, and I don't know if you can see this, but oh no, Fukuoka's grab bag. So so basically, I took 40 species of seeds and threw them all um, into a seed packet, and then we're distributing those seed packets.
Nice.
That's cool.
You know, a lot of the clients that I've worked with in the permaculture world, they have this understanding from their limited exposure of growing in permaculture that they don't need to fertilize their trees, for instance, their fruit trees. And I've been growing for 20 years, and you pretty much always need to fertilize your fruit trees. And the way that they're wanting it to be and thinking about it that doesn't have fertilizer, they're missing the crucial element, which is the landrace genetics. So
Exactly.
So that's,
Um,
then it needs to be done with apples, and, so you shouldn't plant apples from seed because they don't breed true, but then how are you going to get apples adapted to your climate and variety?
right. So the the fear that people have about crossing is that things won't breed true. But how they do breed is the traits of the offspring tend to be halfway between the traits of the parents. And so if I start out with two great parents, I'm going to get two great offspring. And where apples can be a little bit iffy is people grow crab apples sometimes for a pollination source. And so you get a crab apple with a great apple, and that can cause some issues. But if you're only growing like a little orchard in your backyard and they're all great apples, their offspring will probably be great as well. About 150 years ago in my village, they dug irrigation canals, and the habit of the people that were digging those was to eat their apple and then plant the seeds along the dirt that they dug out that day. So the whole irrigation system for 15 miles, every 100 yards or so, there's a wild apple tree growing. And all of those apple trees are edible. Some of them are small, but a lot of them, they have no disease pressure. A lot of them are immune to the codling moths, and so if somebody wanted to, they could do a next generation of those apples, but they just grow fine, and they've been feeding the community for 150 years.
Wow, that's
cool.
great.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, Joseph, can you compare maybe quickly, like, have you seen Mark Shepard's work with restoration agriculture?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's similar. I just wanted to maybe see if we could compare what, and I need to read your book myself so I can get into the details. But yeah, I think it's interesting to see, because basically his idea is that he has a process called stun, sheer total utter neglect. So you just let it be, and you see which ones survive, and you take the ones that do, and it's okay. The other ones didn't, basically.
That could describe my growing method as well.
Cool.
Have you done any work with sweet potatoes in
I
your
have,
farm?
and yeah, they grow great. I mean, except I'm way outside of the ecological range of sweet potatoes,
Right.
and it's really difficult for me to store a tuber for like 6 months between the time I harvest it and I can start making slips off of it. And so eventually my sweet potato project failed. But I know a farmer, Mark Reed, in, I don't know, Indiana, maybe. No, he's further south than that. Anyway, he's growing sweet potatoes, and his goal is to grow sweet potatoes seed to seed in one year.
Yeah.
And he's doing great at that. And so that would be a strategy that would be better for me if I was to try to grow sweet potatoes.
Interesting. I mean, so the idea is that, I just like to explore this topic because I'm a huge sweet potato grower, and I think this is one of the greatest crops for food security, and just I love them. I just love the plant. Yeah. So when you grow the sweet potatoes from slips, they're clones,
right?
Essentially. And so if you get some sort of disease or some kind of issue there, it can wipe out if you only have one variety, it could potentially wipe that out. So is there no, like, from year to year, when you're just growing from slip, which is the way it's usually done, there's no genetic change. It's right. So there's not like some mutation that happens typically or regularly. Okay. So it is from seed. So somebody in California, I guess they knew me from Instagram, just mailed me some sweet potato seeds
nice.
last year, and I grew them out, and I have the tubers growing because I got them a little late. So that's the issue, is that like even here in Tennessee, I wasn't able to get the sweet potatoes to set seeds, even though they grow really, really well here. In order to like, get new varieties of sweet potatoes, you actually have to have seeds set.
Right.
And it's the same with potatoes. True, regular potatoes don't typically set seed, but in order to get new varieties, you have to. And so that makes those crops, even though they're like some of the most important crops that we recommend people grow, more difficult to landrace.
Yeah. So what happens with the crops that are cloned is there's a little bit of genetic damage over decades and centuries, and so they lose the ability to make seeds. And so the primary characteristic that I was selecting for when growing Irish potatoes and sweet potatoes was the ability to make seeds, because like 90% of varieties have simply lost that ability due to the cloning. And so that was my number one selection criteria early on. You don't have to do anything special to a sweet potato for it to make seeds. If it's capable of making seeds, it's going to make seeds, and it's going to make a lot of them. And so just pay attention to see which varieties make seeds for you. Save the seeds from those, and that'll be the foundation for your sweet potato breeding project.
Excellent. That's super exciting, because it's interesting, like a lot of the plants, like let's say cassava, for what can grow in some subtropical areas, but it can't necessarily breed there because the season's not hot enough, long enough, or whatnot. And so you're saying sweet potatoes are actually okay to set seed even in a colder climate?
They set seeds very well for me, but I was selecting specifically for seediness.
Right.
And where we found the best seediness trait was actually from an ornamental variety. And so then the ornamental variety crossed with a variety with large roots, and that was the foundation for our sweet potato breeding project.
That's great.
Do you have a website that people can order seeds off of, and your book and all of that? Or
so I
how
have
can
a
we get our hands?
website, lofthouse.com,
Okay.
and it has links to order my book, and it has links to a bunch of seed companies that sell my seeds.
Perfect.
Most of those seed companies are growing the seed themselves, and I don't have anything to do with it other than the seeds lived in my garden for some time.
I love it.
Right. Well, I'm certainly going to order a bunch now
Me
after
too.
hearing you
Me
talk
too.
about this. I need to get a little bit more space so I can try lots of different crops.
Mhm.
Exciting.
And so I actually read something in your book, even where you're talking about like land racing animals, like chickens, for instance.
Oh yeah.
And
In my world philosophy, we shouldn't be growing inbred anything. Not inbred honeybees, not inbred mushrooms, not inbred chickens or animals, because genetic diversity is just where it's at for disease resistance and ability to cope with the ecosystem.
yeah, I just think that it's like the elephant in the room. Like nobody really is talking about this stuff. People I hear all the time, like new homesteaders, like, oh, I want to get a rooster so I can, I don't have to buy chicks every year. But
Mhm.
like they're all going to be inbred over
Right.
a short amount of time. And then everybody likes their standard chicken breeds. Chickens are super popular right now, and I love all the lots of the different breeds. I have my favorites or whatnot. But lately, after reading your book and thinking about it in that way, I'm now looking at barnyard mixes. Right. I want to get them more diverse and resilient. Like, I mean, I feel like when we're trying to, I guess, we had this idea, that everything went conventional, super controlled poison for so long. And then there was a sort of a pushback, and that was the heirloom interest and the open pollinated interest that nobody was talking about maybe 30 years ago. Now everybody that's coming into this is what they look to do. But nobody's actively participating in creating new genetics. on,
Right.
like you are, like nature does. It's just not talked about. And it's super, super important if we're going to, decentralize the food system and have, successful homesteads all over that people are looking to do more and more now.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So Lana was saying I have your Landrace Gardening book. Do you have another book as well?
That's the only one.
Okay.
This one too. Do you feel like you like being an author or a farmer better? You're not sure
Um,
yet.
well, being an author gets me to novel places and meet new people, and
Hmm.
so that's been fun. The book tours have been really joyful for me.
Good. That's fun.
Nice.
It's great that you've been able to share it. You've had the experiences, you've gone through the testing, the trials and all that. And now I feel like if you said to people, okay, you got 3 or 4 years where you can really get, plants in your area, viable. I think that's a cool roadmap to consider,
Mhm. Yeah.
it doesn't take, a whole lifetime, to kind of
No,
get back
we'll
into.
see if someone is breeding a conventional variety. They say 8 generations, and you got this little weak inbred plant, and
Yeah.
I'm saying 3 years, and you can
Yeah.
have a magnificent variety for your garden.
Yeah, for sure. Gives a lot of hope then.
Hmm.
Sure. Oh. Well, thank you for your time. Is there anything else you want to share? You guys have any other questions? This has been a wealth of knowledge, and I can't wait to get on your website and start ordering seeds.
uh, just thanks for having me on today and for chatting. And I'm really excited about the food forest thing. And so congratulations to all of you for being aware of that and for, um, moving in that direction.
Spreading the word.
Yeah, it feels like it's still early on in some sense too, because it's hard for people to understand and like conceptualize, I think. How do you live differently? Well, it's more than just knowledge of plants or, some of these skills, right? It's actually probably more fundamental, like cultural, like you said, it's a programming that we kind of just go with, and that's just our MO, and
Right.
we have to kind of unlearn ourselves a little bit more,
Lifestyle change, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's been great. Appreciate it, Justin.
Yeah.
Is there,
So
I'm
Thank you.
curious about one thing.
Uh-huh.
Is there, like you said, there was the seed connection. Do you see any movement toward a network of landrace people, or, you know what I'm saying? As far as, because part of what we would love to do is have this connection with people, and build something. And obviously we can't create some mega network maybe that everybody subscribes to, but do you see any movement as far as people getting behind it?
Um, I see a lot of movement. Um, my book sold 4,000 copies already in like a year from a little podunk farmer that doesn't understand anything about marketing or, and so that feels really nice. And a nonprofit organization was created to talk about the ideas in my book, Going to Seed. They made a video course about the book, growingmodernlandraces.com,
Cool.
and so there's a large community. Um, Also, there's a couple of plant breeding forums. Like there's a forum on the permies.com site, and there's open source plant breeding.org. So there are networks that exist and that people could plug into.
That's great. Well, thanks for all your work. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
thank you so much,
Yeah,
Joseph.
thank you.
Hopefully we can have you on again sometime.
Oh, appreciate it.
Yes.
Because I
That's
mean,
where
the thing
Brandon's
is, it
brain is
doesn't
going.
have to just be annuals, right? I mean, it can be
No.
food forest plants. And one of the areas that I feel that the less work is being done that's super important is in tropical places, and subtropical places. They're just not doing that kind of work in the same way, or at least it's not publicized in the same way. Because in the major industrial nations are, in the colder climate typically. And so you could land race freaking avocados, or I mean, that's think about more easy to grow avocados. Think how awesome that would be, right?
I'm land racing jabuticaba, so they fruit in 2 years. Come on.
There you
Right.
go.
Right. Especially with your expensive seeds.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You don't even want to know how many I have.
I think you have about 65. No, 300 different varieties. How many varieties do you have?
Only 25.
Oh,
I think this is just one thought I was thinking. I was considering bringing it up with Joseph, but tying it to people. It's kind of a rabbit hole, but like, there's, and my mind goes to like the the royal family and all these things, but like genetic diversity with people, and maybe the people who crossbreed, are actually healthier. Who knows? I don't know.
that's a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
exactly why I have a half Filipino wife.
Right.
Ian's doing land racing.
I'm land
Well,
racing.
I mean, it is like, I mean, the people used to do that on purpose, and of course, then they started inbreeding, right, for these like family lines.
Yeah.
But that's the way. I mean, like you don't like in the village sense, in the tribal sense, you gotta have to go marry somebody outside your village or your tribe to make
Right.
sure that the genetics are proper there. And yeah, I think it totally applies to people. I understand that that's a touchy subject for a lot of folks, but I don't see how it doesn't.
Right.
That's
I think
funny.
we just talked about it. We can just put
Yeah.
that.
There you go. Rabbit hole.
Now it's time for something to chew on. And that's me. All right, so we have been very much enjoying eating our South Anna butternut squash and our Seminole pumpkins all fall and now into the early winter. And one of the ways that we have been enjoying them, and you can tell because there's only 3 left here, is we've been making muffins out of it. So we roast the pumpkins or the squash, we scrape it out, the puree, and then use that puree to make these muffins. Now these muffins also happen to be gluten-free and sugar-free because that's what we like to eat. But they are very nutritious, and the butternut squash imparts a nice flavor to it. So that is something to chew on. So those squash that I talked about in that video there, they're called, like I said, South Anna. It's ANA. And they're landrace variety that I found out that was originally crossed with Seminole pumpkin a long time ago. Now it's relatively stable. And I grew them this year because they were supposed to be disease resistant to a lot of the issues that we have here. And they were, and they grew like crazy. And some of them were your regular butternut squash shape. And you probably have seen the video, and some of them were a little bit more Seminole pumpkin kind of shaped, like a little bell shaped kind of. And so that's actually an attribute of some land race varieties. They don't always come out identical. So a lot of Joseph's varieties I've seen pictures of are different shapes and colors and sizes from, the same seeds. And they generally have, attributes that are similar, but they don't come out super uniform like that. And so it's interesting that I sort of accidentally grew a landrace. I didn't find out until later that the South Anna was originally a landrace variety, but not only did it do 10 times better than any other relatives that I grew and all the other varieties that I tried to grow a butternut squash, but the flavor is like insane. I just don't, I don't really like butternut squash, and I love this. And my
Did you
son
save the
loves it.
seeds?
Yeah, well, the seeds are saved, when I have boxes of them downstairs. So actually I haven't saved any seeds yet because there's still so many down there. So, when you scoop out the seeds, they're your seeds to plant for the next year.
Yep.
And I actually grew them this year just down the way from Seminole pumpkins, 2 different varieties of Seminole pumpkins that I grew. So chances are a lot of those seeds are crossed. I much preferred the butternut squash to the Seminole pumpkin, so I'm going to probably grow the seeds out from the butternut squash, but they may have crossed with the Seminole pumpkin. And so that's when, you know, you hear people that are they say never save seeds of like squash or pumpkins because they can be easily cross, you know, pollinated with another one and comes out all weird. So like the bees actually will pollinate them, right? So like even your neighbor's crop could come and pollinate yours, and then the fruit looks fine the first year, and you plant the seeds out. You could get some weird hybrid that's like neither a zucchini nor a butternut squash, somewhere in between that sucks. But of course, that's what Joseph is saying. That's how you get new varieties that are resistant. And since mine are crossing with another Seminole pumpkin, which is originally crossed with anyway, I accidentally did Landrace Gardening this year. So I'm super stoked. And if y'all want any of those seeds, I'll be happy to mail them to you as well.
I do.
So, Kevin, maybe you read this in the book, but if it's more than just saving seed from on-site plants, right? I mean, or maybe it isn't. Does he say, okay, every now and then you need to inject new plants into your system?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. He does. And that it actually can get more complicated. I mean, you know, I think that the idea is that we need to change our mindset about it, and everybody needs to start trying this so that we can get the genetic diversity that we need to create food security. But, you know, in practicality, it gets more complicated. And so, yeah, he says that you need to like bring in seeds from seed companies, from neighbors, from, you know, things like that, just to kind of keep them on their toes genetically, so to speak. And then he'll even say that he'll save seeds and use like 2 years ago seeds or 3 years ago seeds to introduce that something back in there, because they, you know, they have a memory of that season, like maybe it was extra cold that year, and then, you know, 3 years later, you know, that may come into play. So yeah, that's a good point. Well, thanks everybody for joining us for another exciting episode. I think that was awesome. And until next time, grow your grass off.
Grow your grass off.
Do it.
Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. Smash that notification bell.
Boom, 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 boom.
And let's go.
Let's go.
Oh.